Like down here at the corners?
Yeah, that's fine. We're gonna take it this.
Okay.
I'll be probably just kind of in this vicinity, maybe 5 to 2 minutes. And then why not if we, I think like I think we just have you here, and then we'll introduce you guys to a step by step. Yeah, we might need to. Yeah, we'll hopefully get that. Those the group that we had there. And Jared, will this microphone be on once I do the 5-minute warning? Should this microphone be on once I do the 5-minute warning?
Now.
Okay.
Just hit him with the big howdy first. They'll get some attention as well.
Got it. Okay.
Yours is on. Basically, when
Howdy. Thank you all for coming. We're going to be, this is the 5-minute warning. We'll have the speaker and the ILC begin in 5 minutes. So thank you all for coming again. Thank you. We got about 50 seconds. Yeah, we got about 50 seconds. I got caught in a discussion with. I did not. Howdy. Awesome. Great to see everyone come out again. I want to say I appreciate you for coming out to this day 2 of the Intentional Leadership Conference. So we will begin in 2 minutes. I'll introduce our speaker. Please take a moment to all silence your electronic devices. During our speaker's presentation, we'd like to remind you again that those who are attending virtually to use that chat feature to ask any questions that you may have. Make sure when you do so to please include your name, the organization that you're from, and the question, please. One of our conference staff members will try to, as quickly as possible, get to that question. But ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to now introduce our featured speaker, Mr. Dave Dunlap. Before we begin, my name is Daniel McKenzie. I'm in the Fintech Saggy Band. I'll be serving as the band commander for next year. I've had the pleasure of serving as the logistics lead for the ILC just this last year. And so we have a really great conference. So again, we're focusing on ethical leadership. It matters. And so today, Mr. Dunlap's going to speak a lot on those same issues and things that hopefully you can directly translate into the workplace, as him and I were just discussing. But Mr. Dave Dunlap is a Fintech Saggy class of 1983. He is the president of Crystal Beach Oil and Gas LLC, a private investment company with a focus on the oil and gas industry and real estate investments. He's also on the board of directors of several companies, including Wellbore Integrity Solutions, a global diversified oil field services company. Most recently, Mr. Dunlap was president, CEO, and director of Superior Energy Services, a position that he held from April 2010 until March 2021. During his tenure at Superior, the company expanded through organic growth and acquisitions into one of the largest globally diversified oil and gas service companies. Mr. Dunlap is an inductee in the Texas A&M Corps of Cadets Hall of Honor and is a recipient of the Texas A&M College of Engineering Outstanding Alumni Honor Award. He is also a generous supporter of the Corps of Cadets and the Fintech Saggy Band, including being the namesake of the Dunlap Drill Field. He and his wife, Ann, are the parents of 6 children, including 4 graduates of Texas A&M University. Let's welcome back to Aggieland, Mr. Dave Dunlap.
Thanks, everybody, and howdy. It is always wonderful to be back on campus to speak to you. I get a chance to come back to campus frequently, involved in a number of the different organizations here, but what I'm doing today I love the most, and hopefully I'm able to impart some experience that I've had in my working career for you who are preparing for the workplace. I really admire the purpose of this conference. As you all are building competencies to prepare for a successful transition to the workplace. I wish that I'd had this kind of preparation as a cadet. I didn't. We didn't have anything like the Hollingsworth Institute then. We didn't have these types of conferences. The Corps then was preparing people to go in the military, and if you didn't go in the military and were a DNC cadet, as was I, there was really no special preparation for the workplace. But because I was a member of the Corps of Cadets, I was better prepared than others, and you will be too. And even if you weren't here today, you would be better prepared than a lot of your coworkers will be, because you learned hard work. You understand what hard work is as a cadet, right? You understand discipline. You understand discipline. You will encounter coworkers that have never had to work hard in their life and have no idea what discipline is. You know how to be a follower. You learn that as an underclassman, right? And you still practice that some as an upperclassman. And learning how to be a follower is a skill set into itself that many people never really get. And you learn about leadership. I learned about leadership via example, because we didn't have this type of program. And of course, some of the examples were good and some of them weren't so good. But nonetheless, you learn. So my career began in 1984. I graduated on May the 5th, 1984, and started working for a company called BJ Services, an oil field service company, in June of 1984. It was a terrible company. It was a terrible company. Terrible culture, terrible values, no well-defined mission, no well-defined vision. Most of the managers were not what I would consider to be professional managers in the company. It was terrible. I didn't know it at the time. I just thought it was another company, right? I mean, I'm 21 years old and out there trying to figure out life, and I didn't realize how bad it was until I looked back in hindsight. Our company was a division of the Hughes Tool Company, which later became Baker Hughes. Anybody familiar with Baker Hughes? Big global service company. They owned BJ Services when I went to work for them in 1984. And in 1990, they decided they didn't want us anymore, so they spun us off. We did an IPO. Anybody familiar with IPOs? Initial public offerings. where you sell your company to the public marketplace. We were listed on the New York Stock Exchange. When we IPO'd in 1990, the company was valued at $300 million. Interestingly enough, Baker Hughes bought the company back in 2010, 20 years later, 1990 to 2010, for $7.6 billion. That was good. That's about a 17.5% compound annual growth rate for those doing the math in their head. I had a great experience at BJ Services. Like I said, when I went there, it was a terrible company, but we turned it into a great company. In 2007, I became chief operating officer and was chief operating officer in 2010 when we sold the company. I was 48 years old at the time and really wanted to be a CEO. I became the CEO at a company called Superior Energy Services and was there for 11 years in the CEO role, it was an incredible experience. And I don't know if any of you in this room aspire to be CEOs, but I would tell you it's an incredible experience. It was always an aspiration of mine, and I was fortunate enough to achieve that. Oh, I got to change slides. There we go. So I put this tagline on some of my presentations, the CEO Playbook, and I'll tell you why I do that. I learned a lot in my 11 years as CEO at Superior, and I will tell you I learned most of my lessons as a result of failures. Most of my lessons, and most of what I'll speak to you about today, is not because I was the perfect CEO. I haven't met that one. Most of what I'll talk about today was a result of failures. And I've chosen as the topic today, defending your values. So some of you may have heard me speak about values before. I'm very passionate about values and how values are underrepresented in the workplace today, but you can do something about that. And I hope that we're able to answer a few questions by the time we get to the end of this presentation. And the questions kind of summarizes this. If you don't believe this or understand it, I hope you walk away understanding why values are important in the workplace. You know they're important in the Corps of Cadets. What about the workplace? I've talked before to some of you about operationalizing core values. Daniel and I were speaking before the presentation and said there's been some discussion about that. Operationalizing values is the only way values go to work, so I hope you walk away with an understanding of that. Then I want to talk about why values fail. Why values fail in companies, in organizations. And then how your personal values fit. And some of you may have crafted personal values of your own, value statements. If you haven't, I'm going to encourage you to do it. And finally, what can you do to get ready for some of these challenges in the business world? The role of being a CEO is all-encompassing. I will tell you, it's an incredibly fulfilling job and an incredibly difficult job. You're ultimately responsible for everything. You ever heard that phrase, the buck stops here? When you're the CEO of a public company, the buck stops there. Everything that goes right, you can take the credit for it or you can distribute the credit for it, but everything that goes wrong is ultimately going to fall back on you. I like to simplify the responsibilities of a CEO in 2 words. I got to simplify things, process them properly. I'm not the smartest guy in the room, I promise you. And so the way I simplify those responsibilities of being a CEO, it boils down to 2 things, the 2 C's, cash and culture. So let me get cash out of the way first. And we're not going to talk about cash today. Although I've told Ken I'm happy to come back and talk about cash sometime. But cash is all-encompassing too, right? And so the revenues of the company, which is not your cash, it's just your revenue, but the profits of the company, the capital investment of the company, the way the company uses cash, whether you distribute cash to shareholders in a dividend or buy back shares, or perhaps put it to work in merger and acquisitions, or perhaps you use your cash, for research and development, whatever the purpose may be. The CEO ultimately makes a decision about what happens with cash. And if you're a big, successful company, you generate a lot of cash. My peak year at Superior was in 2014. We generated $1.3 billion in cash. But what do you do with that? That's a responsibility of CEO. I'm going to tell you, it's the easy one. It's the easy one. The other C, culture. Culture's not so easy. Culture is difficult, and that's what I want to talk to you about just a bit more. Culture is an important lever for a CEO. It's not the only lever. It really goes along with strategy. Probably the 2 most critical levers that a CEO has are strategy and culture. Now I'm going to get strategy out of the way. So what is strategy? Strategy ultimately defines how we compete. What you do as a company, what your strategies are, define how you will compete, and then allow you to provide clarity to the organization about how you're going to compete. That's important. It's important for employees to know, what am I doing to make us more competitive? And you can have employees that go dream that up on their own, or you can direct them properly through strategy. Strategy is always a collaborative effort. Culture's not. Culture defines how we're going to behave. Can't delegate that responsibility. A CEO can delegate strategy, and should. But a CEO can't delegate culture. He's ultimately responsible for culture. He can't delegate cash. He's ultimately responsible for cash. So I said strategy should be developed in a collaborative way. Anybody know why? Anybody understand why? So why a CEO shouldn't sit behind his desk and write a strategy and hand it off? He's not going to execute it. He's going to have somebody else in his organization execute strategies. Most companies have multiple parallel strategies that work at the same time, and the CEO can't be responsible for every one of those work streams. And so the best way to develop strategy is to do it with a group. So you get buy-in, right? You guys do that all the time. You get a group of leaders together, you come up with a strategy, and the reason you do it as a group is so that people buy into it. They agree with it. They're willing to call it their own and then go execute that strategy. Strategies will fail, right? Not every strategy is going to be successful. There will be strategies that fail. And like I said, most companies have multiple strategies that run at the same time. I'm done with strategy. Culture is more important. Yeah, I love this quote up here. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you don't get culture right, your strategies will fail. Every single time they will fail. You may think you're having some success, but you'll look back at those strategies in hindsight and say, if I actually had a better culture in this company, I would be more successful with my strategies. Strategy's easy. Culture is hard. So I love this visual. I use this visual in a presentation I did to a group of fall up here. Some of you may have seen it before. The iceberg, right? The iceberg. The iceberg is a wonderful visual for me when I think about culture. Culture is the iceberg. So you know, most icebergs, what you see above the surface of the water is only about 5% of the mass of that iceberg. Most of the iceberg's below the surface. It's below the surface. So if I think about culture as being the entire iceberg, including the 95% that you can't see, what you see at the top, what you see at the surface, is what we call behavior. That's behavior. And sitting right below the surface of this iceberg, not consuming the entire mass of culture, but what you see right below the surface, those are values. Those are values. So let me be clear. I intend to focus on values here today if you haven't gotten that. In fact, Ken's over here laughing because he knows I focus on it all the time. So let's talk a little bit about how values fit into culture. Values aren't the only element of culture. There are three of the most common elements that scholars define as being elements of culture are values, traditions, and customs, which if you think about it makes sense. Now, if we were talking about a country and the culture of a country, you may include language. But for most organizations, these are the three common words. Think about Texas A&M University, right? What defines the culture at Texas A&M University? We'd like to think our values are part of that. I'll talk about Texas A&M values here in a moment, but certainly our traditions and certainly our customs, the way we do things. In a company, those customs typically are things like the way that we budget for our business, the way that we do our capital spending planning, the way that we do meetings with management or meetings with board of directors. These become customs in a company. They tend to have a rhythm. Every quarter you meet with a certain management team. Every quarter you meet with your board of directors to discuss the company results. These become customs in the company and ultimately embedded in the culture. And of course, every company has certain traditions. They're not generally as important as the traditions you'd see at a place like Texas A&M, but nonetheless, traditions within a company that are important. But I will tell you the most overriding element of culture in a company are the values of that company. Well, let's think about some attributes of culture. They need to be shared. Everybody needs to have the same idea. What is our culture? What are the things we do? What are our values? What are our traditions? What are our customs? They need to be pervasive. They need to be enduring, and they need to be implicit. For a culture to be successful, all of those elements are most important. So clearly I'm focusing on values. Let's think about the definition, right? And these are words, these are my words, by the way, that I've grabbed from a number of different sources, but it's what I believe. Values are individual beliefs that motivate people to act one way or another. They serve as a guide for human behavior. They serve as a guide for human behavior. Values are the most important deterrent in how you behave as a person. Generally, people are predisposed to adopt values they were raised with. Most of you in this room, at least before you showed up on this campus, would have said your values came from your parents or your grandparents or whoever raised you. People also tend to believe that their values are right, which is always something as humans we have to think about because they're the values of their particular culture. So, anybody familiar with the values of Texas A&M? Before I put the slide up, could everybody in this room recite them? I bet you could. Values of Texas A&M University. Anybody know the history of these values? Where they came from? Come on, jump out there. Let me read something to you. This is from the Association of Former Students website. Texas A&M core values. During 2005, the university's been here since 1876. But in 2005, Texas A&M, under the leadership of then university president Dr. Robert Gates, conducted a study of the perceived brand and value of the university, what it means to be an Aggie, and what Texas A&M means to its many different and diverse constituencies. In short, it was an exercise to define a core set of values, to put words on that spirit can never be told. 6 words ascended into a cultural doctrine for current and former students, friends, faculty, and staff: loyalty, integrity, excellence, leadership, selfless service, and respect. That's where the values came from. The meat behind that story is Robert Gates actually hired a consultant to study our university and come up with these 6 words. Now, I will tell you, I'm reading this. You can't see this. I didn't make a slide out of it. You just have to believe me. Trust me. I'm reading this statement from page 37 of a January 2021 report from the Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I was actually part of this commission, so I knew these words were embedded in this report. You think about it. That's where our core values show up, and they showed up in a report from a commission on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Do you know why the commission was formed? It was formed in 2020, summer of 2020, carried out their work. It was a group of about 50 people, carried out their work in the second half of 2020 and put forth their report in January 2021. Do you know why the commission was formed? Because of behavior. Because of bad behavior on this campus by students and by former students. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine bad behavior at Texas A&M University? Does any other university in the world have a defined set of values as clear as ours? 6 very clear words. You can't take 10 steps on this campus without seeing the words, can you? They're all over the place. It's wonderful. It's wonderful that this has become part of our university. And before 2005, it wasn't. We may have lived according to the words, or some may have, but the words weren't everywhere. And you think about our university having problems with behavior. Is that surprising to anyone? Oh, come on, it's not surprising to you, right? I mean, you witness bad behavior every day, don't you? I bet 3/4 of the people in this room, and I think I'm underestimating, have probably witnessed bad behavior from the time they got up this morning until the time they walked into this forum. Just nodding his head. See? Confirmation. I love Texas A&M, okay? I'm certainly not dragging our university through the mud. That's not the intent. The intent is to demonstrate for you very clearly how hard values are. Because if they're hard here, I promise you they're harder in the workplace. When I became CEO at Superior Energy in 2010, one of the first things that I did, this is a company I never worked for, right? I step in as the CEO, the guy in charge, buck stops here, all that stuff. I spent a lot of time trying to identify culture. We had a mission, a vision, and value statement. They were on our website, and nobody in the company knew what they were. Not a single person. I couldn't find anybody that's good. If I asked somebody in my company, what are our values, like I just did you, they had no idea. They didn't even know where to find it. The values had never been operationalized. Culture was left to individual business units, and the result is that there was bad behavior. I needed to fix that bad behavior. I needed to fix our culture. I wrote these values. These are the Superior Energy core values. I did not hire a consultant. I wrote them myself. I then developed a training program, put 2,500 leaders in the company through that 2-day training program. I participated in most of those programs. I'd give the opening remarks, about an hour long, explaining to people why we were doing this. And why we were doing it is because I was tired of witnessing what I considered to be bad behavior, and you would consider it bad behavior too. Supervisors that scream at people, racial slurs being used in the workplace, sexual advances on employees, unwanted. That's bad behavior, and it happens every single day in the working world. No matter who you go to work for, you're going to see these things happen because I've yet to find the perfectly behaved company. And by the way, you won't either. We clearly had behavior problems at Superior. It was clear to me. I spent a lot of time and effort in focusing on these values and focusing on education for our leaders. We did change the culture in the company. Our behavior improved. I saw evidence of this. I could spend a lot of time telling you about it, but we had hotline reports where employees could complain when they saw bad behavior. You have to do it. Dodd-Frank legislation passed in 2009 requires public companies to do it. And so I had quantitative proof that our behavior improved over time, but I had to fire people to do it. And what made it easy to fire people is once I've educated you on the values, if you can't live that way, then I don't want you in my organization. You're tearing my organization apart. You're preventing me from accomplishing the strategies that I want to accomplish because culture eats strategy for breakfast. Values fail, though. Why do values fail? So first off, tone from the top. Top at Superior Energy Services was me. I was the CEO. I'm at the top. Being a public company CEO is very hard, I will tell you. Tone from the top influences everything. And whenever anything goes wrong, the first question people ask is, well, what's the tone from the top? That's the first thing I want to know. What's the CEO saying about this? You know what the average tenure is of a public company CEO today? So, I mean, think about this. Being a public company CEO is one of the best jobs in the world, right? You all see what public company CEOs get paid. I mean, they get published from time to time. I mean, public company CEOs, it's an unbelievable job. Average tenure today of a public company CEO in the United States is 4.9 years. That is not very long, is it? You're on this campus, many of you for just over 4.9 years, some of you less than 4.9 years. But it's not very long. And those of you that are seniors are looking back saying, wow, this went by fast. Most of you are anyway. It does go by fast. 5 years is not very long. The average age of a public company CEO in the US today is 51 years. 51 years old. Part of the reason for that is it is an emotionally and physically draining job. I left Superior at the age of 60 after 11 years. It was very mutual. The company knew it was time for a new CEO, and Dave Dunlap knew I was tired. I was tired. It is a draining job. It's a difficult job. And part of the reason is everything emanates from you. Tone from the top. But in your current organization, it's important too, right? The way the CEO acts, that's kind of the way your outfit acts, right? Training and education. Why do values fail? Values fail because tone from the top's no good, and values fail because people aren't educated and trained in what those values are. By the way, we don't do that at Texas A&M either. That's a whole nother topic, which I'm passionate about. Because I would hope one day that every graduate of this university walks away with an intimate understanding of those 6 words and that they're operationalized in your life. We're not there. I hope that we get there one day. Behavioral enforcement. What do I mean by this? When you see bad behavior, does someone correct it? Does somebody do something about it? When you see your peers behaving poorly, do you have the courage to tell them something? That's what behavioral enforcement means. So if you're in an organization that has a set of values, they're defined, but the CEO doesn't ever talk about them, and there's really no training and education, and when bad behavior happens, there's no result, nobody gets disciplined, nobody gets fired, then does that company really have values? Finally, there's this idea of conflicting communication. I want you to be careful of this one, even in your current roles in the Corps of Cadets. Let's think about conflicting communication. I have a few phrases here that just drive me crazy when I hear them. A company that says, I have values, I have these things, but we're going to accomplish X, Y, Z at all cost. At all cost. Well, if you're an employee in that company and the boss says at all cost, that means at all cost, right? That means put values off to the side, we're accomplishing this mission. Conflicting language, conflicting communication. Another phrase that gets used frequently is, this is the most important thing. This is most important. Tough phrase. You say this is most important, that means everything else that you've said before doesn't matter as much. As a leader, you have to be careful about that kind of language. In companies, we say, profits trump all. Profit's the most important thing. Earnings are the most important thing. No, they're not. They're only important within the confines of our values and our culture. And then finally, nothing's more important than winning. That message, you know what that message is? Break laws. Break regulations. Do whatever you have to do, because nothing is more important than winning. Now, you might be asking at this point, okay, Dave, what does this mean to me? Anybody in here looking for a job? I see some nods going on. Yeah. Anybody interviewing for jobs? Are you actively interviewing? Or most of y'all probably, you're from the Corps Cadets, you probably already have your jobs, right? Some of you may be interviewing. Have you asked your prospective companies about their values? Are you asking those interviewers that come on campus or that you're seeing out maybe in an office somewhere about their culture? Is that part of the question that you're asking? I can tell you how the question is going to get answered, by the way, because there's no recruiter that's going to tell you, we got bad values in our company. We got a bad culture. They're not going to tell you that. That's their recruiters. They're trying to sell you. Understand that. They are trying to sell you. They're not going to tell you the truth. They will make up whatever fiction they want to make up to attract you to become an employee. Are you asking about tone from the top or about what the company does for training and education of the values in that company? Do you want to work for a company that has a strong culture and that has good values? Anybody want to work for that company? See some heads going up and down. Good luck. Good luck with that. I'm just telling you the truth. It's likely not to happen. It is likely not to happen, but don't despair. Your participation here today and your everyday experience in the Corps Cadets is preparing you for what is likely to be a very unpleasant first work experience. Because I'm telling you these words today, I know many of you are going to remember. I hope you remember. You're going to remember what Dunlap told you about culture and values, and most companies have bad cultures and bad values. And you're going to go to work somewhere, and you're going to be there for a short period of time and go, that old guy told me this. He told me what was going to happen. But you're preparing for it. And this is where you can win. What else can you do? So I asked earlier about personal value statements. I don't know if this is part of the program in Hollingsworth or not, but have any of you developed your own personal value statements? See some? Okay. If you haven't, I highly encourage it. Start now. Yeah, go back to your dorm today and jot some things down. Maybe they're just the Aggie core values. That's a great starting point. But over time, I'd encourage you to open those back up and do it now before you graduate. Do it now before you go into the workplace. Because what's really important when you go into that workplace where there's a bad culture and bad values is that at least you can fall back on your own. At least you can fall back on your personal values. And once again, I would encourage you as a starting point, use the A&M core values. They're awesome words. It's important that you have those personal values not just written down on a piece of paper, but actually operationalized in your own life to be in the best position to succeed with an employer whose values are not operationalized. And I'm telling you, 90% chance that you're going to go to work for a company whose values are not operationalized. So operationalize your own. Operationalize your own. Nobody is going to tell you they have bad values. I've never seen a value statement that had anything bad on it. They're all rosy. They're all beautiful. They're mostly aspirational. And values can't be aspirational. If they are, they're not real values. And so when you make your list and you put together your personal values and you go, that's not really what I do. I want to do that. That's aspirational. It changed your life. Change the way you behave. Get your own behavior aligned with your personal values. So when you go into the workplace, you're not going in as a weak culture person. You're going in as a strong culture person. This will allow you to be an instrument of change in a company that has bad values and bad culture. You will become noticed. You will become noticed. So now let's talk about positively influencing that culture. I'm going to give you a few other hints on what you can actually do. So you're going to go to work for a company, and 90% of companies out there at least have a statement somewhere out there, as we did at Superior. Mission, vision, values. These all came from the same consulting firms back in the 1990s when companies didn't have these things, and consulting firms made a bunch of money because they get hired to help them write mission, vision, and value statements. They're out there. Go find your company's mission, vision, and values. Go find it. Go find it, read it, understand it, print it out, put it on your wall, look at it every day, become very, very familiar with the mission, vision, and values of your company. Then overlay your personal values with those company values. You will find that in many cases they align because companies don't have bad value statements. They just don't have values operationalized. But if you've already operationalized your personal values, then adopting some of the company language to your personal values will be easy to do. Now you have one set of values. Now it's easy. Now it's easy because they're embedded in your head because you've practiced and operationalized those values. Now you're in a position to be an influencer, being a change agent for the values and behavior and culture in a company where culture is weak, which is where you're going to work. That's where you're going to work. Sorry for the bad news. It's just true. Now, most of you in your first role with a company won't be in a management role, right? Let's see. So I heard a few people that said they were interviewing for jobs. Anybody going to be a manager in your first job? Yeah, don't see many hands. That's typically not what happens. They typically, despite the fact that you've attended the finest university on the planet and are part of the Corps of Cadets, the greatest leadership laboratory in the world, most employers are not going to hire you to be a manager on day one. You're going to have some other role. You're going to work for somebody else. But you are always a leader. You are always a leader. You have a greater capacity to lead in that company than most of the management team has. You have that capacity. You have it practiced in the Corps of Cadets from hard work and discipline. You have learned lessons here as part of Hollingsworth that are going to make you very effective as a leader, way more effective than your coworkers. Most important in being in that role where you're not the manager is the way you live your life at work, the words you use, the way you demonstrate your values. You ever hear that phrase? Football coaches like to use this phrase all the time. Your actions speak so loud, I can't hear what you're saying. Your actions speak so loud, I can't hear what you're saying. Live your life that way. You know how to live your life that way. If you have your personal values operationalized, you will live your life that way. Don't be satisfied that you're the only guy on the ground in that company that's got values, that's operationalized those values. Seek to get better all the time. Oh, and I didn't bring this one up. Defend your values. This is the hard one, right? Don't ever let anyone say your values aren't important to me because. Defend them. Defend those people that are being offended by behavior that's inconsistent with your personal values. Okay, so did I give you kind of a game plan there? I hope I did. I hope you walk away going, God, what a good game plan. Maybe not. You're so fortunate. In the Corps of Cadets, Everything that we've talked about today, all of the hints I've given you for preparing for what is going to be a challenging culture in the wherever place you go to work, you can prepare. Be ready for it. I'm not blowing smoke here. You're going to work for a company whose culture and values are not what you expect them to be. I promise you that. But all of the actions are things that you can do and you can practice today in the Corps Cadets. In your roles in the Corps, whether you're a freshman or a senior, all of these things in developing the habits around your own personal values are things that you can do today. The Corps Cadets has a mission, a vision, and values. Do you know them? You know the university values. The core values and the university values, there's a few different words. There's a big discussion about that now. I'm not sure it's always going to be that way. But mission, vision, and values in the Corps Cadets, do you know them? Can you communicate them? Can you lead by those? Do you use, if you're an upperclassman, do you use those words with underclassmen on a regular basis? You should. That's what you're going to want to do with the company you go to work for. You know, what does it allow us to do? It allows us to use a common language. When we have a common language, culture is easier because we see things in the same way. And most importantly, of course, live your life by the values and constantly self-evaluate. Yet never be satisfied with where you are. Always look for, what can I do next? What can I do more in developing, operationalizing my own personal values in my life? So that when I get to that first employer, and I want you all to be successful when you go to that first employer, I do. And I don't mean to scare you about your first employer. I'm just telling you like it is. It's not going to be a good culture and values. The company may be great. They may pay you great. You know, may be fun. You may learn a lot. But I promise you the culture and values are aspirational in most of these companies. And they were in my own. And even though we implemented our core values in 2014 in Superior, and I witnessed the change in behavior, it was never right. It was never where I wanted it to be. There was always room for improvement, and there is in all our lives. So the best way to think about that is don't be satisfied. You've never crossed that finish line. You're never going to cross that finish line of what culture and values operationalized look like. So constantly be self-critical and constantly self-evaluate. I hope I've spoken some words today that are meaningful to you. I certainly enjoy and appreciate the opportunity to be here. I admire each and every one of you. I admire what you do in the Corps Cadets and the way that you represent Texas A&M University. And now I'd be happy to answer questions. So thank you.
And then notes for any questions, you can come up to the two mics right here. If anyone has any questions, for anyone on Zoom as well, feel free to throw those in the chat, and we'll try to answer those as much as we can. Okay. Well, to start, I have a question as well to start for you. What was the first moment or experience for yourself when you were in the workplace that you feel like the values and the things you learned in the Corps?
Yeah, so I described my first job with BJ Services in 1984, and I described the company as it was a terrible company. It was a terrible company. So we didn't have anywhere stated mission, vision, or values. I went to a meeting about a week into my employment, and our big boss, the region manager, I was just a field engineer at the time, invited me to come. There weren't very many engineers in our region, and he knew in hiring me, he was hiring a college graduate, which there weren't very many college graduates in our region. I'm telling you, it was a bad company. And big, too. I mean, there were, I started my working career in Lafayette, Louisiana, and in our region, we had about 1,500 employees. It was a big company. And anyway, so he invited me for exposure to attend this manager's meeting, and I sat in a room with 12 men. There were no females at the conference table. It was 12 men, and they were, their language was, it was right out of a bar room. This meeting took place at 10 o'clock in the morning, and you would have thought you were at the Dixie Chicken at midnight on a Saturday night. It's the way they were dressed. It's the language that they used. It was incredibly unprofessional. It was, I mean, come on, I mean, I'm 21 years old. I'd heard all the language before, so it's not personally offensive, But it was a clear indication that this was not a good management environment. Of course, I'm thinking all the time, oh, this is awesome. This is awesome, because there were 12 people sitting at that table, and I knew in that very first meeting, after being with the company for a week, I'm going to go places with this group. I know I am. I know I'm more talented. I know I have a better background. I know I have a better culture. I know I'm a better person. I'm listening to these guys. They can't speak. They can't finish sentences. It's unbelievable what poor quality management they were. And listen, if you find yourself in that similar situation, don't be depressed, man. That's opportunity, right? That is opportunity. I had this, anyway, it's opportunity when you're in a place with untalented people. And I experienced it literally my first week on the job. It was pretty clear. Other questions?
Welcome back to Aggieland.
Thank you.
I had a quick question. So how did you, what are some ways that you were able to integrate your new company values with some of your employees?
Yeah, so when I realized that part of the behavioral problems that I was witnessing, and I don't know if I was clear about this, but the witnessing of these behavioral problems is actually, like I said, it's quantitative. In 2009, U.S. Congress passed legislation called the Dodd-Frank Act, and it included a whistleblower provision. Now think about this. This was a response to bad corporate behavior from Enron and WorldCom and some of those companies that had very public, massive failures in the 2000s. Really between 2000 and 2008. Legislation passed in 2009. So what this Whistleblower Act did, this is insane and really scary as a public company seat. Dodd-Frank said, listen, if you have an employee that witnesses bad behavior, particularly fraudulent behavior, falsifying information in SEC reports, Securities Exchange Commission reports, or if an employee witnesses that behavior and tells you about it, and you don't do anything about it, then the government agency is going to investigate you, and whatever fine we place on the company, we're going to give the whistleblower a third of it. So I don't know how many of you pay attention to SEC and Department of Justice fines, but they tend to run in the millions of dollars. So you just incentivized every employee in the company to find fraud. And so what companies did to respond to that, you needed to have a very organized way for collecting this information that may come in from an employee. So we all got hotlines, and you could call this hotline and say, hey, I'm witnessing this. But what most employees use the hotline for is to complain about bad behavior from their bosses. And every quarter, I got all this data compiled, and I could see what all these complaints were. And it was this massive list, and it was ridiculous stuff. Yeah, my supervisor screams at me all the time. My supervisor's got pornographic material on his computer screen, and it's offensive to me. My boss uses racial slurs, and so to your question, I saw this data compiling, right? And I'm sitting in my office reading about this bad behavior and trying to figure out why we are behaving so badly. And it strikes me that I have to fix this, because if employees are using the hotline and calling about these complaints and nothing happens, you know what their conclusion is? It's okay with Dave. Guess my boss treating me poorly is okay with Dave. And it wasn't okay. And so I saw these hints, and it's what caused me to look at the way we were driving behavior in the company through our values, and it just wasn't working. So I wrote new values, and then I created training programs and put everyone with a leadership position in the company, 2,500 people, over the course of a year and a half through this 2-day program. And it was focused on the values, and I'm really proud of the way it was done. We did it with video vignettes. So I hired a production company that came in, and they filmed scenes in my offices or in my shops or in our workplace that were real examples of things that had been called in on our hotline. And the hard thing about values, and you will know this from your time in the Corps of Cadets, it's easy to see the black and white behavior of values. Something's right or something's not, or something's wrong, right? But most of the time, our judgment about behavior with individuals doesn't fit in that black or white area. It's gray. It's in between. You have to interpret it. And so it's why I don't believe words work for values. I think you have to have active training so that people train their minds to think about how do I respond to behavior that's in this gray area, because most of the time it's in that gray area. It's not black or white. Did that answer your question? I know I talked a lot there, sorry.
Talking. My question for you is, so as we're going into the workplace, or even just right now, and we don't have a company necessary to work on their values, the thing that we really need to work on as cadets are our personal values. And so my question for you is, what are some of the ways that you have, even currently, acted on a daily basis to strengthen your own personal values and remind yourself of that, sir?
I brought this with me. We've met before, I think.
Yes, sir.
Yes, but we did not plan this, okay? Those are my values. I see there, I don't carry them with me all the time, sorry. They've been refined over the years. When I first went to work at Superior, it was important for me when I made these, I traveled around all over the place and introduced myself to employees, and we'd get them together in a room or in a shop or whatever it may be. And I'd introduce myself and talk a little bit about what I intended to do for the first 90 days, first 180 days. And then I tell them, I said, I need to let you know what my values are. I need to let you know. These are my values. And they've changed since then because I'm constantly self-evaluating and refining. And although I would tell you, since I'm out of the day-to-day working world and out of the day-to-day responsibility of CEO, if any of you are wondering, Crystal Beach Oil and Gas has one employee, it's me. It's awesome. It's awesome. Every now and then my employee, me, needs to have a little motivational speech, and I go stand in the bathroom in front of the mirror and give it to myself. If you don't do that, it's liberating. You should do that from time to time. Anyway, I wouldn't say that I spend as much time on this page as I used to. But when I was working, and I didn't have the benefit of being in a program like this. I didn't know about developing your own personal values. I did it really for the first time when I was probably 15 years into my career. And we were spending a lot of time on values in my old company at BJ Services, which developed a really good culture, by the way. And was sitting in a lecture where somebody asked, do you developed your own personal values? And so I did mine and then refined them over the years, and I have them here right now. I brought them as a demonstration because I knew you were going to ask a question about it. You're welcome.
Morning, sir. I'm Cadet Odanuga from Nacogdoches, Texas. Thank you for coming here to speak to us. Appreciate it. I just wanted to ask you, let's say as an employee, you entered a company that didn't have, a set of values, or they weren't following it. What steps can you take as an employee to potentially push that to happen?
I mean, listen, it's a hard situation to be in, and that's why I kind of used the strong language that I did. It will be hard. It will be hard for you. I think there are a couple things. One, as I said, if the company doesn't have stated values anywhere, and a lot of small companies don't. Most big companies do. They've been through this exercise. Most of them haven't operationalized those values, but big companies tend to have mission, vision, values very much available to any employee. It's out on a website somewhere and nobody looks at it. Small companies may not even have that. Small companies may not have that. And so my advice to you would be to study leadership and watch in your first weeks and months on the job the way that those leaders behave, and try and write their values for them. And there may not be very many. There may not be very many, but you want to at least understand from a value standpoint the way that your managers or leaders in a small company, in a lot of cases it may be the person that owns the company, you've got to kind of determine based on the way they act what their values are. Then you look at your personal values and see, okay, how can I mold these together? And it may be that my personal values are way stronger than the values that I witness from my employer, but I'm going to incorporate even the few values that my employer demonstrates into mine so that I can live in this workplace with a single set of values. No one's going to look poorly on your values. And so I'll give you an example. Say you've gone to work for a company and you realize, okay, the owner of this company yells at people all the time. And so I'm thinking about my own personal values. I'll just use the Aggie core values. Where does respect fit in? Right? Respect is one of the hardest values out there. Right? Just know that. It's a hard one on so many different fronts. but I'm witnessing behavior from my employer that is disrespectful all the time. And so how do I maintain as my personal value respect, living in an environment where disrespect is tolerated? And you do it by the way you live. You do it by carrying yourself in such a way that people are going to notice, this guy's good. I want to be more like this guy. It may reach a point, and don't be afraid of this when it happens. It may reach a point where you realize, I can't tolerate working in an environment where my values are not evident. And then what I'm going to tell you to do is go find another job. Leave. Don't be miserable. Certainly don't bend to their values. Defend your own. And if it means you got to leave, leave. Go find somewhere else. You'll be unhappy if you stay. You won't progress the way you want to personally if you stay. And those are hard words, but that's what you should do. You should leave. I would.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Look, Ken, we're trying to get everybody a job, and I just told them to leave. You know that? Yeah. That last time Dunlap gets invited back to speak, I know. Well, listen, with a lack of additional questions, I once again want to thank you for allowing me to be here today. It's an honor and a privilege. I love each and every one of you and what you do, and hope you are very successful as you progress in your career with the Corps and to that you find beyond the Corps cadets in Texas A&M. Gig 'em.
Thank you so much for coming out again. Again, I just want to say thanks for our sponsors, Aggie Moms, as well as our Quad Moms, as well as Texas Pioneer Foundation. I'm also going to throw up the QR code for feedback, for if anyone has the time to throw in, give some feedback before you leave or later on today, it'd be greatly appreciated. But again, I appreciate y'all coming out this morning. Hopefully you had some very applicable and intentional things you can take from here on out, and hope you all have a good rest of your day. Thank you so much for attending the ILC. Well done. Awesome. Thank you, sir.